Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Wednesday edition of Point of View, and if you've looked at your calendar, it is June 30th, and that means something for a lot of us in ministry because it's the last day of our fiscal year. And as we have mentioned before, we do have a matching grant on the table, and as far as I can tell from talking to some people around here, we haven't met it yet, so there's an opportunity for you to put us over the top. We do this, number one, to certainly focus on what we can provide to you here at Point of View and to be a difference maker, which is kind of our theme. But also we wanted to bring on, especially today, our good friend Gary Bauer, because we encourage you not only to support this ministry, to support his as well. We depend upon him in many ways to be our eyes and ears there in Washington, D.C., an individual that served under President Ronald Reagan's administration as the chief domestic policy advisor. Also, of course, is the head of American Values and the chairman of the Campaign for Working Families. We have some great information about his website as well as his end-of-day report. And as always, we did a couple of the golden oldies or the best of Gary Bauer, and the first one has to do with the big lie. But first of all, Gary Bauer, thank you for joining us, and always great to have you on the program.
Well, Kerby, it's always great to be with you, and I'm always amazed when you're in the middle of what is a key thing for any ministry to try to bring in the funds you need to keep doing the great work that you do, that you're so kind to share some of your time on the air to direct people to the kind of work that I'm doing. There are many people that will do that, and it's always deeply impressed me, and it just reinforces why, in my mind and in my heart, having partnered with you and Point of View over the years on these great battles is something that I'll always be pleased and proud about, and I know there's many great weeks and months and years ahead of winning more battles for faith, family, and freedom.
Well, if nothing else, I tell people that I'm not asking you to do something I don't do, and I support American values, as you well know. So, again, I'm encouraging people.
Indeed.
So let's, if we can, see if you can help me out, because when I've heard the phrase defund the police, I was convinced that the people that were promoting that were primarily people in the Democratic Party, oftentimes very progressive individuals, some who maybe weren't even Democrats, but just were even further to the left. And yet, lo and behold, I hear that actually the people that are wanting to defund the police are the Republican Party.
Kerby, when I first heard this story and saw the White House spokesman on one of the Sunday talk shows making this case, I thought I was in the middle of a colossal late April Fool's Day joke. I mean, this is insanity, and it to me, it indicates that they have a very low opinion of the intelligence of the American people. Everybody knows that, not just recently, but for a number of decades, the American political left, and increasingly that's the Democrat Party, has been hostile to law enforcement. This isn't a new development. I mean, it goes all the way back to the 1960s when the left routinely called police pigs, and then fast forward to the day and all the things that have happened in the years since then. In the last couple of years, we've seen the anti-police rhetoric that has really come out of not only radical groups like Antifa and others, but from elected officials in Congress, the so-called squad, these They call themselves progressives. I think they're regressives because there's nothing they want that would bring progress. And we've heard it from leading figures in the Democrat Party over and over and over again. When Donald Trump sent federal police, federal law enforcement to Seattle and Portland to try to help restore law there and to protect federal buildings, multiple Democrat members of Congress referred to those federal police officers as Nazis and fascists. So it's just insane now for some of these folks to claim that it's Republicans that are against the police. Next thing you know, Kerby, they'll be telling us that they were the ones who were for the wall and are pro-life and believe in smaller government.
I'm not waiting for that one. But again, some of you might be listening saying, he says, well, everybody knows. Well, I need some facts. And that's why we have what I call Gary Bauer's Greatest Hits. Our first article there is a reprint of yesterday's first section. It's about 11 paragraphs, so there's a lot of material. And if you click on the different links, New York City, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, you look at some of the comments by Joe Biden, comments by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and all the others, you will then find multiple articles that exist. And one of the reasons we do that is, first of all, as we always say, you don't have to even believe what we say. Read it for yourself, and then check out some of the facts and figures there. And it also gives you an odd indication of why I think everybody should subscribe to your end of day report. And I guess I want to get to one other issue, and then we'll take a break. The fact that this is such a whopper is so incredible to me that, we used to joke about the fact that President Bill Clinton sometimes had some whoppers, but I think even he would maybe pull Cedric Richmond aside and say, that's a little bit much for me. But the fact that they do that brings us to one of the reasons why I encourage people to support you and Point of View. The mainstream press kind of went along with this, and I think there is a sense in which some of the individuals making that statement first Sunday, then Monday, and even a little bit yesterday on Tuesday, was because they knew that they had a compliant press that wouldn't really challenge some of the things being said.
Kerby, that's a great analysis, and that's exactly right. Any conservative I know working in Washington, when you're trying to come up with arguments to make on a particular subject, and somebody in your staff suggests, well, why don't we say such and such? Your first thought is, well, wait a minute, I can't prove that point. The media would kill me over that. But there's no such restraint for the progressive left in this country, because the media, by and large, is on the same team with them. So whether it's the fact-checking industry, which we've seen in operation during the Trump years, they suddenly grow very quiet when it's checking facts as fundamental as this. In fact, I've called a couple of those checkers at the Washington Post and some other places, and my calls go into message. He's out of town. He won't be back for probably 3 more years. They don't do any fact-checking on the left. It's very sad and very dangerous.
I think so. So again, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Gary Bauer, because first of all, he helps clarify the fact that, I don't know, I just always thought that it was the other side that wanted to defund the police, and yet now we're hearing people say that indeed we are erroneously saying the wrong thing, and it really is the Republican Party that's been involved in this. And so when we come back from the break, I thought we also might talk about this Countering Extremism Working Group, and also that there is a national strategy for countering domestic terrorism. I'm sure Gary Bauer will have something to say about that, because when you ask people in the military, what's the greatest threat? I don't know. I think some of us around the table, I don't know, we might say China, Russia, maybe North Korea, Iran. Apparently it's white supremacy. So we're going to get into that topic with Gary Bauer right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Americans in general, and even evangelicals in particular, seem confused about important details of their faith. A study by Lifeway Research found that Americans don't know much about theology, and many evangelicals seem confused as well. Tyler O'Neill wrote about the 12 lies American evangelicals believe. Here are just a few of them. Americans generally believe that their personal salvation depends on good works. The survey found that 3/4 agreed with the statement that people must contribute to their own effort for personal salvation. More than half said that good deeds help them earn a spot in heaven. On the other hand, 60% said Christ's death on the cross is the only sacrifice that could remove the penalty of sin. This statement is closer to what the Bible teaches in Ephesians 2:8-9, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this not of your own doing, it is the gift of God, not the result of works, so that no one should boast." Americans seem to believe that everyone goes to heaven. The study even found that almost two-thirds of evangelicals described heaven as a place where all people will ultimately be reunited with their loved ones. Just over half of Americans agreed with the biblical view that only those who trust in Jesus Christ alone receive eternal salvation. Americans also believe that salvation can come through many means. Nearly two-thirds said that God accepts worship of all religions. Nearly half of evangelicals agree that God accepts kinds of worship, and this survey correlates with a survey done by Pro Ministries with Bronner Research of born-again millennials. Americans in general, and evangelicals in particular, accept a pluralistic view of salvation. You know, these surveys remind us that churches need to focus even more attention on teaching sound doctrine. And when we're witnessing to non-believers, we need to define our terms and clearly explain the message of salvation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again with Gary Bauer, and one of the things about Gary Bauer is he wears a lot of hats. In addition to, of course, American values and the campaign for working families, also has been one of the commissioners in the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. And I'm sure from time to time, maybe his wife Carol pulls him aside and say, you know, Gary, you're doing entirely too much. But I'm glad you've served in that particular venue because you recognize what is the threat to religious freedom. You also recognize only so well what is a threat to American sovereignty. And yet I have to admit that you have right now in the Pentagon a countering extremism working group. The other day I did a commentary by really Michael Berry in which he's really the only conservative participant there, because even if you were believe that we should try to eradicate the scourge of extremism, that doesn't seem to be where the threat is, because of article I've got in front of me right here by Timothy Furnish, Biden's new counterterrorism strategy, a lying dog-faced pony soldier of a document. I love the line. But anyway, 92% of the folks on the FBI's most wanted list are Muslim. 78% of global terrorist groups are Muslim. None are white supremacists, yes. But somehow the wokeness warriors are telling us that the real threat is not external, it's internal. What about that?
Well, Kerby, what you just described and summarized really well is a gigantic threat facing our country, and particularly facing those of us who are conservative and pro-life, believe in the Constitution, believe in the kind of values that our founding fathers built the country on. This has become a major theme of the Biden administration, that there is a threat in America from radical right-wing groups or white supremacist groups, and that it's got to be rooted out wherever it can be found. Now, when you start delving into this, you end up finding descriptions or definitions of what extremism is on the right, that definitions that would encompass half the country. In fact, they've even, in some of these reports, have suggested that if you go around talking all the time about being a patriot, that somehow that is a warning flag that you might be in this group of constitutional extremists. It's very vague. but it appears to be aimed at one half of the country, the kind of people that vote conservative in elections, believe in all the values that this country has encouraged and promoted virtually the entire history of our nation. I think there are serious constitutional problems here. One of the things the Pentagon has admitted publicly is that they're going to be monitoring the social media of members of the armed forces. What kind of websites do they visit? Are they saying things on social media that would raise red flags? And as you alluded to earlier, I don't have a problem with that if they're looking to see if anybody in the military is communicating with people in communist China, or is working with somebody in Russia, or has contacts with Antifa or actual extremist groups. But if they're looking at members of the military to see whether they're going to groups that promote the U.S. Constitution, are worried about the federal government getting too much power and being too overreaching and how it tries to regulate our citizens, and are calling that extremism, then we really are facing a very, very serious problem.
Well, just again, think about recruitment, because lots of young men and women actually join the military because of love of country, pride in service, and certainly this idea of sacrifice and patriotism. And yet you can imagine that some of them, because of their zeal, might have said something that looked patriotic on their social media, might have even said, live free or die on there. All it takes is something like that to be defined as extremist, and they don't even necessarily get in. But more importantly, a lot of them are going to think, well, if this is what we're going to have, basically wokeness warriors leading us and no longer wanting to fight for this nation, there are a good number of them that might just say, I'm not going to go down to the recruiting center, and that's not good for the future of this country either, is it?
No, it isn't. And what a juxtaposition here. I mean, on the one hand, they're trying to root out members of the military that have what I would call just normal conservative views. And then on the other hand, they're introducing in the military, as you just referred to, this left-wing woke propaganda. Senator Cotton and then several members of the House have asked active duty members of the military to contact them if they're getting any of this left-wing extremist material being introduced into their military units. And both Senator Cotton's office as well as House members' offices are literally being inundated with hundreds and hundreds of reports from active duty American military in all branches of our government, saying that they're being told to read various left-wing books. They're being told to read books that teach that all white people are bigoted. I mean, that's a racist concept right there. And books that undermine your love, basically, of America. Now, think of the juxtaposition here, Kerby. On July 1, Communist China will be celebrating the anniversary of the communist takeover of China, and they are going all out. Yes. Patriotism among Chinese youth is going through the roof. And here in the United States, not only in our schools, but even in our military, we're teaching things that will undermine the love of Americans for our country.
And so, again, just a good example of why we encourage people to find out a little bit more about some of these issues that we talk about every single day. Next hour, I will get into some of the things happening at the border, because today Donald Trump is down there. Greg Abbott is down there. We've got a piece by Julio Rosas, who, while he's doing a broadcast on the Rio Grande River, you can see this raft come across, and then he just keeps the camera rolling, and they just get off almost like, oh, I'm glad you got some lights on. It makes it a little easier for us, and just the sort of the nonchalant, let's just come on into this country, and we'll be talking about that more in the next hour. But as I certainly would like to get your comments for just a moment, we have a crisis at the border And again, I just don't feel like the establishment media wants to even cover it. And Kamala Harris didn't exactly spend a whole lot of time down there either, did she?
No, she didn't. And this ought to be dominating the front page of our newspapers virtually every day. I don't have the figures right at my fingertips, but on a number of these months, I think if you take, I believe it's May of 2020 when President Trump was in office and was building the wall, we had encounters with people trying to cross our border. In that month, I think there were 28,000. In the same month this year, it was 175,000. I mean, Kerby, these are figures that people haven't seen in decades. There's estimates now by credible experts in this field that we may have as many as 2 million people enter this country illegally before 2021 is over. And I know most Americans aren't aware of this. Like, so where are they all going? I mean, why aren't the centers at the border even overflowing even more? Well, we've discovered that at night, under cover of darkness, by bus and by plane, they are sending thousands of these people that are being apprehended into the interior of the United States. They're flying them in or busing them in to places like Nashville, Tennessee, Oklahoma
Incredible.
City,
Yes.
other cities in Texas, all while the American people are asleep, and they don't even notify the governors and mayors of these states and cities. This is a national scandal, and quite frankly, I don't like talking about impeachment. I think it was abused during the Trump years when they tried to impeach him on trumped-up charges. But I think it is impeachable what President Biden is doing right now in his dereliction of duty in not securing our southern border.
Well, again, this is one of the reasons why we encourage you to consider what you might do to support Point of View. We have our Be a Difference Maker, and we have a matching fund. And I also want to encourage the same thing. Give to Gary Bauer. We have a link there. You should for sure subscribe to his end-of-day report. That's just a must-read every single day. And I would encourage you to send a gift to him as well. And so, Gary, thank you for partnering with us, and always look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you, Kerby. And I want to encourage my listeners who I know listen to your show. I know they're great donors to me, but I want them to support your work because without guys like you, my message could never get out.
Thank you so very much. Again, it's available at the website, pointofview.net. We'll talk about some other issues right after this.
Today is the day that with one simple act, you can make a difference in our country over the next 6 months. This is one of the biggest opportunities to double your impact that I can remember. We have a $65,000 matching challenge to end the fiscal year today. These friends will match your investment in the transforming work of Point of View dollar for dollar up to $65,000. But we need you to step up today. Our fiscal year-end total will help define how much we can accomplish together for the remainder of 2021, how much fake news we can combat together, how many experts we can bring you with wisdom on how to act. Together, our work will change people, churches, communities, and the nation. Make a difference by visiting pointofview.net/difference or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Make double the difference. Pointofview.net/difference and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let's see if we can talk about some of the controversy in school boards across the country. And we've been talking a little bit about what's been happening in Loudoun County, Virginia. But if you paid attention, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about a really incredible success that just happened down the road from where this broadcast is, Carrollton, Texas, in which they originally found out about critical race theory being taught, posted the curriculum on the website, began to go to the school board, recognizing that if they didn't see the light, they would feel the heat, decided they were going to run some candidates, but also was wise enough to say, look, if you're going to, as a conservative candidate, run against a school board member, we want you to come to a meeting, we're going to vet you, we're going to pick the best one and tell the rest of you not to run so we don't divide this. Then they had greater turnout than ever before for a school board election, and they began to turn it around. And we posted a couple of weeks ago kind of this 10-page summary of the success of what happened there in Texas. Well, if you've been watching the news at all, what's been going on in Loudoun County and some other places is in the news. And so our good friend Robert Knight has written two very good pieces. We've posted both of those on the website. These appeared in the Washington Times. One was June 12th. The other one was June 25th, if I remember right. And so we've posted those so you can read them in their entirety. And Robert Knight is a good friend of this ministry, a former Los Angeles Times news editor. He's also been a media fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. He's been a regular columnist for the Washington Times and so many other venues as well. Has his bachelor's and master's degree in political science from American University and joins us now by phone. So, Robert, thank you for joining us again today here on Point of View.
Kerby, it's always an honor to be on with you.
Okay, tell us about Loudoun County. I used to live in the Virginia area when I went to Georgetown, but most of our listeners do not live in Virginia, don't know why all of a sudden this county, which is a county pretty conservative around the Washington, D.C. metro, has sort of become ground zero on this whole issue of critical race theory and a number of other issues. What's going on?
Loudoun County used to be the most conservative county in the Washington area, but it's morphed into one of the most liberal counties. The population's doubled over the last couple decades. Very high-tech population. It's brought in a lot of liberal people from California and elsewhere, and it's really changed the demographics and the political structure, and that includes the school board, which is almost all Democrats. And they have been imposing critical race theory in Loudoun County schools without really telling parents about it. They've also been insisting on the transgender agenda in the school system. And they really overreached when they held a hearing and lots of parents showed up, and including one of the elementary school gym teachers who's a Christian, a guy named Tanner Cross.
Yes.
And he just spoke very clearly and eloquently about why it would be a sin against God to tell girls they're boys and vice versa, and he just wasn't going to do it. So the board suspended him, or the superintendent did, and he had to file a lawsuit with Alliance Defending Freedom to get his job back. But the schools are appealing that decision. They want to make an example out of him. So parents are up in arms over the critical race theory and the firing of Tanner Cross. And they keep discovering bad things in the curricula. So they've decided to recall 6 of the school board members who were caught being part of a Facebook group that was doxing parents critical of critical race theory.
There you go.
Doxing means revealing publicly their addresses, phone numbers, emails, so they can be harassed. So here you have school board members, part of a group that's harassing parents for speaking out in public, as is their right. So the recall effort's well underway. I mean, there are petitions all over the county. Moms in particular are just furious, and they're walking neighborhoods. They're meeting. They're setting up petition signing places. I think it's going to happen. I think they're probably going to oust these 6 board members. And this is just a sample of what's happening all over the country as parents are waking up. And that's the good news.
That's what can kind of help people understand. If you read these articles, you'll learn a little bit more about, for example, the teacher Tanner Cross and his sin, if you will. His offense was he just couldn't address children by their identity pronouns. And I love what he said, because in that school board meeting, he said, look, I love my students and I would never lie to them regarding their consequences. And yet he was explaining that I just can't tell a boy who now says I'm a girl, her. I mean, that's not something I can do. And that's enough to get you thrown to the street. But the good news is, if parents are concerned, very quickly there are opportunities out there, and I want our listeners to kind of learn some lessons vicariously from, for example, the success I've talked about in Carroll ISD in Texas, or what's now happening in Loudoun County, because this will continue going on if we don't stand up as parents and recognize that sometimes the most important election is the school board election, and if you can get even 15% of the registered voters out, you are doing really well. But if you can get even people in your church to recognize what's going on, you can turn things around pretty quickly, can't you?
Well, you really can. And one encouraging sign is that a lot of minority moms and dads are rising up to oppose critical race theory. An example is Keisha King in Duval County, Florida. At a school board meeting, she said, let me quote her, just coming off May 31st, marking 100 years since the Tulsa riots, and that was a terrible race riot in which a lot of black people were killed. It's sad we're even contemplating something like critical race theory, where children will be separated by their skin color and deemed permanently oppressed or oppressors in 2021. Telling my child or any child they're in a permanently oppressed status in America because they're black is racist. And saying white people are automatically above me, my children, or any child is racist as well. This is not something we can stand for in our country. This is like Chantel Cooper, a mother of 2 biracial children in Loudoun County, as you mentioned. And she said CRT, critical race theory, is racist. It's abusive. It discriminates against one's color. And she said, think twice before you indoctrinate such racist theories. You cannot tell me what is or not racist. What is or what is not racist? Look at me. And she's standing there with she's got dreadlocks, very much a very angry black woman who doesn't want her children subjected to this kind of Marxist propaganda. And by the way, that's what it is. I'm sure, Kerby, you've had people explain what it is, but in a nutshell, it's Marxist theory that says that you have to constantly criticize institutions and people and break them down until they're destroyed, and then you can erect the communism on the ashes of that society. And critical race theory is a way to pit us into identity groups and pit us at each other so that the state can grow at the expense of everything else, including families and churches and community organizations.
I might just mention that I have done a number of commentaries that you can read on that. We also have coming out very shortly the booklet, a point of view booklet on critical race theory. But since you mentioned Marxism, let's go to China for just a minute, because one of the mothers actually lived in communist China, lived through the Cultural Revolution, and then she said to me and a lot of Chinese, it is heartbreaking that we escaped communism and now we experience communism here. And she said the communist regime used the same critical theory to divide people. The only difference is they use class instead of race. And that is, Marx, of course, had the idea of a class struggle, but the cultural Marxists said, oh, wait a minute, we can maybe, instead of putting class there, we'll put race, gender, sexual ideology. And it reminds me a little bit of Rod Dreyer's book, Live Not by Lies. You have people coming over here, not just from China, but coming over from Poland and Czechoslovakia and behind the Iron Curtain, who said, I've seen this before, and I left those countries to come to a place which I thought believed in freedom.
Yeah, there was one woman who attended, I think, Columbia University, and she came out and said the brainwashing there was worse than that she said was happening in North Korea. Now think about that. That's one of the worst police states in the world. It's a terrible place. And she said the students were subjected to nonstop propaganda. They couldn't voice their own opinions. They were punished if they did so. I mean, this is right out of Mao's Cultural Revolution, where they paraded people through the streets in dunce caps and beat them up and even killed people eventually. This stuff is dangerous, Kerby, and it's heartening to see people rise up against it right now.
I think so. Let's take a break. Let me just mention that both of these articles by Robert Knight are on our website, pointofview.net. Of course, we have a link to his website, and if you'd like to get some of his books, like to have him come and speak, we're coming out of COVID now, so he would be a great speaker for you to have. That's all available at our website. But as you go there, you're going to know something else, and that is we have our banner that says Be a Difference Maker, and we are really highlighting some of the people standing up and making a difference. We want to equip you to do that, and we want you to pay it forward to actually help other people become difference makers as well. And as I mentioned, we do have a matching fund. We haven't met it yet, so maybe you can help put us over the top. It's all available at our website, pointofview.net. We'll come back with Robert Knight right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Robert Knight with us for a few more minutes. And by the way, and especially in the second hour, we're going to be taking phone calls on a variety of topics that we'll be addressing. Of course, we'll be talking about the whole issue of the border and immigration. Donald Trump and Greg Abbott are down at the border with some real important video that we've posted here coming from Julio Rosas. Whether or not that might even have an impact on the election, whether or not the NSA was spying on Tucker Carlson and all sorts of other topics topics we're going to get into. But let me just mention that if you'd like to contact Robert Knight, it's Robert H. Knight. Don't forget the H, roberthknight.com, and you'll see Knight Write, and then get all sorts of good information about what he has. We've already posted 2 of the very excellent op-eds that he has written for the Washington Times, which of course are then placed in all sorts of other venues like One News Now and Town Hall and all the rest. So there are some great resources there. But Robert, for just a minute, we always like to do some positives. Matter of fact, my producer said, we need to do more and more positive stories. And I said, well, I agree. And one of the articles you have posted right now at Knight Write is The Power of Fathers. Now, on Father's Day, I actually spoke a little bit on this book by Paul Vitz, who was a psychiatrist who actually wrote a book, The Faith of the Fatherless, and found something very interesting. Many of the prominent atheists of the 20th century either did not have a father or a very bad relationship with a father, maybe a defective relationship with a father, and then went back and also found that those kind of outstanding Christians usually had either a father or a father figure that was very positive. And I know when you wrote about the power of fathers, you reminded us of something else. In the prisons, it's real easy to get some of the prisoners to buy Mother's Day cards for their mothers, but if they offer Father's Day cards, not as many, right?
Yeah, they don't want any. I've talked to people at Prison Fellowship and other prison ministries, and they say they can't give those things away. But the Mother's Day cards, yeah, they snap them up. And that's because there's so many single mothers. But to me, that's an indication of how important fathers are, because you're talking about prison inmates, men whose lives have gone wrong and who have victimized others, and that's why they're behind bars. And they didn't have a father there, largely, to guide them. And the society has told us over and over that it really doesn't matter whether you have a mother or a father, or whether they're married. It doesn't matter. You can make any arrangement you want, and you'll get a similar outcome, which is a bald-faced lie. It's proven every day by what happened in the inner cities after the welfare policies of the Great Society shattered the black family, and the gangs arose, and social decay set in, and you know the rest. And the good news is, I think, fathers are, in some realms, are being more appreciated than ever. You have to look for it because a lot of society hasn't woken up to it yet. But there are role models out there, and the evidence is so overwhelming that fathers are important that I'm surprised that even liberals out there who seem afraid of their own shadow about being politically incorrect aren't willing to concede that, yeah, maybe dad's important.
And again, I might just point people to your website, because one of your books is The Truth About Marriage and God's Design. And you have been in this, they'd like to call it space, for some time. You've recognized that first we changed the whole issue of sexuality in the 1960s. Then we changed the divorce laws. Then we began to say, oh, there's no difference with homosexuality. And now we find ourselves with the transgender issue. And you've been writing about this for decades. And all of a sudden now, parents are waking up saying, these ideas that started in the university and got into popular culture, they're now being taught every single day in grade school and middle school and high school, aren't they?
Yeah, it really got going in the universities with Herbert Marcuse, who was a Marxist educator. I remember having to read him when I was in college at American University. And I think he wrote a book called Eros and Civilization, and he was preaching free love. And saying, this is the key to happiness. Don't think about families anymore, or motherhood or fatherhood. Just, do what feels good. The other thing he said was, it's okay for liberals to engage in repressive tolerance. In other words, you can actively suppress ideas you don't like because you're right and they're wrong. So we don't need free speech anymore. And of course, we've seen this take hold in universities all over the country, and then they go ahead and train the teachers, and the teachers' unions, who are completely leftist now, dominate education. And this is why I encourage any Christian parents who can do so, get their kids out of the government schools. I know not every parent can do that, but if it's something you can do and sacrifice a bit to do it, to homeschool or put them in a Christian school, it is so well worth it. And by the way, I just want to give a nod to Point of View, because you don't get this kind of information in the mainstream media. I consider Point of View Radio Free America. Because the mainstream media are gaslighting us every day. And gaslighting means making you think you're crazy and you can't believe what your eyes are telling you. Right now they're gaslighting us, saying it is the Republicans who are all about defunding the police. And if you believe that, then you'll believe anything. I mean, the Democrats.
I remember your column a while back where you talked about the left's chutzpah knows no bounds, and that was where they were saying that Republicans are all obsessed about race. I'm going, I don't think so. I mean,
it's the Republicans pushing critical race theory, I'm sure. Yeah. No, they think if they repeat the big lie over and over again, people will buy it. And I'm afraid that's true, which is why we need Point of View more than ever. So I hope you get the support you need, Kerby.
Well, I appreciate that. Some calls are coming in. So, by the way, if you'd like to join us, we'll take those calls right after the break, 1-800-351-1212. But let me just also commend to people that piece that came out as well. Just the incredible amount of brash comments. There are other phrases. Chutzpah is a good one, I guess, as well. That defunding the police, Republicans are defunding the police, Republicans are all obsessed about race, and all these other ideas. And I think it also illustrates one other point that I know you've made before, because you work with the Media Research Center. They only get away with that because they know there's a compliant press that goes along with that. I mean, where are the fact checkers that seemed to be on steroids when Donald Trump was there? They all seem to be asleep right now or out of town. I can't figure out what's going on.
Oh, yeah, when we're told there's no problem at the border, there's not really a crisis. Everybody knows otherwise. But you see the media, it's the last issue they want to discuss right now, the border, because people know that we're watching our country be destroyed before our very eyes. I don't think that's an exaggeration when you have millions of people coming over the border who can be manipulated into being dependent on the government and then reliably vote Democrat. And the Democrat Party really isn't the liberal party a lot of people liked years ago. It's become functionally Marxist. Wow. And I say that as a political scientist and a journalist. And I'd like to think I'm wrong, but the evidence is overwhelming that they come at everything through a Marxist lens.
Wow. Well, again, Robert Knight's been with us. We have a link to his website. We have 2 of his articles. And when we come back, I see one of the callers wants to talk about critical race theory in the Frankfurt School. We'll do that. We're going to get into the issue of immigration and a number of other things. But, Robert, thank you for your kind words about Point of View. And as always, I look forward to the next opportunity.
Anytime, Kerby. I really enjoy being on with you. Thanks, and God bless.
Let me, just as we're going to a break, encourage you maybe to contact him. He would be a great speaker for your group. Number 2, we do have a banner, Be a Difference Maker. We have a matching fund. And as you go to the website, pointofview.net, it gives you a countdown clock, and we're just 10 hours away from the end of our fiscal year. And we have, of course, had a very interesting one. I guess that's the best word to use for it, with a pandemic, a lockdown, and some others. And I recognize some of you are not in a position to support this ministry, but if some of you are and can step up, you will be the ones that'll put us over that matching fund limit. We still have room for you, and we'd love to hear from you. That number, 800-347-5151 or pointofview.net. We'll take some calls right after this.
Today is the day that with one simple act, you can make a difference in our country over the next 6 months. This is one of the biggest opportunities to double your impact that I can remember. We have a $65,000 matching challenge to end the fiscal year today. These friends will match your investment in the transforming work of Point of View dollar for dollar up to $65,000. But we need you to step up today. Our fiscal year-end total will help define how much we can accomplish together for the remainder of 2021, how much fake news we can combat together, how many experts we can bring you with wisdom on how to act. Together, our work will change people, churches, communities, and the nation. Make a difference by visiting pointofview.net/difference or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Make double the difference. Pointofview.net/difference and 1-800-347-5151. 5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Because we're going to get into some of the issues in the news. And, of course, you have the former president of the United States, the current governor of Texas, at the border. So we'll talk about that. We've posted a very good piece by Julio Rosas, which I'll get to in just a minute, which if you follow it, you can actually see the video where he's doing a kind of a stand-up conversation with the camera on and lights on at the Rio Grande River. And as he's doing that, you see this raft coming over, and then, of course, see some other pictures of others. And just, you know, hundreds of people coming across at night. Of course, many of them come across in the daytime. Many of them just walk across because the wall has not been completed in many sections. So we'll talk about that. And then what does that mean for the country and even for the next election? Article I posted yesterday in terms of what some people are calling the Biden border backlash. So we'll get into those issues. But one of the topics we addressed this last hour was critical race theory. So I want to take some calls on that. So if you'd like to join us on air, that number is 800-351-1212. Now, just a few minutes ago, I gave the pledge line number in case you want to, and I hope you would like to join with us and make a gift to help us make it over the top of our matching fund. And that is a different number. And I think all of you can walk and chew gum at the same time. I do know some people say if I'm going to chew gum, I have to sit down. But okay, I think most of you can recognize there's two different numbers. And the number to call to talk to someone off air, if you would like to make a gift on your credit card, is 800-347-5151. When I gave that out just a minute ago, there were a lot of phone calls. I'm hoping we caught them all, but if you didn't get someone to answer, now would be a good time to call again or wait. Of course, you can always give online. I tend to do a fair amount of giving online because I can oftentimes then think about what I want to do, pray about it, and all the rest. But if you certainly would want to talk to someone right now and help us as we end our fiscal year, less than 10 hours, and then it's over. Again, that number, 800-347-5151. Let's take some on-air calls, and we'll go to South Carolina. Brian, I appreciate you calling today. I think you want to educate us a little bit on the issue of critical race theory.
No, Kerby, I'm sure that you know much more about critical race theory and critical theory from the 1920s than I could possibly say. Thank you for taking my call. It was certainly an honor to be on your program.
Well, thank you.
Back in the 1920s, in 1923, a man named Felix Weil started an institute for social research at the Goethe University in Frankfurt, Germany. And they included some of the people, maybe these names will ring a bell with some people: Horkheimer, Adorno, Marcuse, Benjamin, Pollock, Lowenthal, Fromm. These people were part of the critical theory school. And in 1933, when Hitler came in, this Jewish group transferred to Columbia University in New York in a new school, and they started it here. So I would like to, since there's so many of these critical theories like critical race theory, critical gender theory, critical mass culture theory, whatever, I'd like for you to tell us about how that fits together from this idea that started in the 20s with a Marxist critical theory.
Well, very good. And again, you can help me out if I make a mistake along the way. But again, we have a booklet coming out on critical race theory, and I do take you a little bit through the history of the Frankfurt School that came over to Columbia. And the idea was simply this, and we've talked about this with a couple of people, Paul Kenger and others, that classical Marxism, and I went to graduate school, studied Marxism from a Marxist, because I wanted to just get it right from the individual there. But classical Marxists would say that if you will, the revolution was going to come between the bourgeois and the proletariat, between the working class and the capitalists. And that really never happened. This was, in some ways, forced onto the people. And so there was a real kind of mindset that was developed early on in what we now call cultural Marxism, to say that instead maybe we can foment a revolution between races. And so that's critical race theory. Or we can focus on gender and sexual orientation, and that could be the case as well. And so in some respects, people say, well, when you say critical race theory is Marxist, well, technically, no. Realistically, yes. And so I think it's just simpler to simply point out the fact that it wants to make a division and sees a division between those ideas. And then there have been all sorts of different proponents, some talking about white fragility, some talking about white supremacy, some talking about white privilege, and a variety of others that have worked their way into the popular culture. But, Brian, one of the other things I hear people saying all the time is, well, this is just taught in the law schools. Well, yes, it is. Or it's just taught in graduate school. Yes, it is. But it's also showing up in the high schools, the middle schools, sometimes even the grade schools. And that's one of the things that people like Christopher Rufo have documented. And so it wasn't surprising there was a hit piece came out the other day from the Washington Post trying to make fun of him and trying to criticize him, although they had to come back and correct almost everything they said about him because they got it wrong. And so this is why it's showing up in the schools. And one other point, and I'll let you make a comment, for people that say, no, it's not being taught, you now have the Zinn group, which is based on some of the teachings of Howard Zinn, also a Marxist, People's History of America, that now have collected 4,000 signatures of teachers that say they want to teach critical race theory in the schools. So this argument that, well, you don't know what you're talking about, or we're not really teaching critical race theory, that's kind of the attempt to try to push back. But, Brian, I think if anything, we go back and look at the history, we recognize that it had Marxist roots, and it certainly is going to be something that is going to divide this country rather than unify it. Any final comments from you?
One thing I noticed between critical theory and critical race theory is that the former was all about criticizing everything down to the ground, and essentially burning everything down to the ground. And that seems to be the idea with critical race theory as well. It's all about burning down either the culture or the institution or the ideology that exists in this area, and starting over from scorched earth.
Yes, rewrite the history, tear down the monuments, all the rest, because then we can, from the ashes, maybe build a utopian society. And, of course, the question I always have for my Marxist friends is, can you point any place where this has worked effectively? Because I can point a lot of places that have led to more death and destruction than you can possibly have imagined. So, Brian, you've educated us today. I appreciate you calling in. We come back. I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about this issue of the border. There are some reasons to focus on that. One, of course, is the political reason, and that is Donald Trump and Greg Abbott are there at the moment. There's also just a very good piece that we've posted by Julio Rosas, who actually has been down at the border. By the way, if you're not familiar with him, he's one of the reporters for Town Hall. And I'd just encourage you to watch the video because it just illustrates what's going on. And then, is this going to have an impact in the next election? I think it is. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Americans in general, and even evangelicals in particular, seem confused about important details of their faith. A study by Lifeway Research found that Americans don't know much about theology, and many evangelicals seem confused as well. Tyler O'Neill wrote about the 12 lies American evangelicals believe. Here are just a few of them. Americans generally believe that their personal salvation depends on good works. The survey found that 3/4 agreed with the statement that people must contribute to their own effort for personal salvation. More than half said that good deeds help them earn a spot in heaven. On the other hand, 60% said Christ's death on the cross is the only sacrifice that could remove the penalty of sin. This statement is closer to what the Bible teaches in Ephesians 2:8-9, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this not of your own doing, it is the gift of God, not the result of works, so that no one should boast." Americans seem to believe that everyone goes to heaven. The study even found that almost 2/3 of evangelicals described heaven as a place where all people will ultimately be reunited with their loved ones. Just over half of Americans agreed with the biblical view that only those who trust in Jesus Christ alone receive eternal salvation. Americans also believe that salvation can come through many means. Nearly 2/3 said that God accepts worship of all religions. Nearly half of evangelicals agree that God accepts all kinds of worship, and this survey correlates with a survey done by Probe Ministries with Bronner Research of born-again millennials. Americans in general, and evangelicals in particular, accept a pluralistic view of salvation. You know, these surveys remind us that churches need to focus even more attention on teaching sound doctrine. And when we're witnessing to non-believers, we need to define our terms and clearly explain the message of salvation. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you hear on Viewpoints by visiting pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we want to talk about immigration and the crisis at the border. And if you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. And just a little bit later, I'll give the other phone number again in case you want to join with us as we come to the last few hours of our fiscal year. And if you can help us out financially, we'd appreciate it. We've also highlighted a couple of other ministries this week that we think you should support, and I hope that you will consider that as well. Let me, for a minute, before we get into what is happening right now with former President Donald Trump and Governor Greg Abbott, they are going to, of course, be speaking. Maybe already have done so. I've kind of lost track of that, but they were going to be in front of one of the unfinished walls there on the border. And whether you look at the wall, whether you look at the border, whether you look at the issue of immigration, let me come back to something we mentioned an hour ago, and that is Gary Bauer said that last month, the best estimates are about 170,000 people crossed the border. Now, first of all, let's recognize that that is the number of people that we estimate came across or that we saw or interdicted, and we know that for every person you catch, there are so many that we don't. But well, let's just use that number for a minute. Okay, let's divide it into each day of the week and each day of the month. And so 170,000, okay, you take 31 days, and you end up with about 5,000 people crossing the border every single day. Now, let's put that in some perspective. Because they cross in the border sometimes at night, or even when they do cross the border in the daytime, they're usually met. Sometimes they're returned. Rarely are they especially if they claim they want asylum. So they're told immediately then that they have to fill out these papers, and then there will be a hearing to judge whether or not they actually qualify for asylum, and then they're released into the general population, or as we pointed out, they're put on a bus and bussed somewhere, sometimes even on a plane, sent somewhere into the United States. By the way, no longer is California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas just border states. Everybody is a border state. Now, maybe those of you in Alaska and Florida, well, maybe Alaska and Hawaii aren't, but everybody else is. And so think about if this wasn't crossing the border, if instead they were getting off of an airplane. Because if you're talking about 5,000 people every single day, your typical 747 plane has anywhere from 300 to 500 seats. Most of them don't have 500, but I'm going to be generous and say, okay, 500 seats, that's like 10 747 airplanes. You with me on this? Okay, I'm not trying to make it any more complex than that. And imagine if every single day there were airplanes landing in Atlanta Airport, Chicago Airport, New York Airport, Seattle Airport, Dallas Airport, San Francisco Airport, Los Angeles Airport, Minnesota Airport, Minneapolis Airport, Denver Airport, Houston Airport. That's 10, I think. 500 people got out of every one of those airplanes every single day. They just walked out on the tarmac, were maybe met by some immigration officials and told that we'll get to you and we'll try to have a hearing, and you come back when it's time for your hearing. And then they just disappear. Do you think there would be a crisis? Of course there would be. And this, I think, illustrates why the mainstream press is engaged in a dereliction of duty. There wasn't a lot of concern about people crossing the border when Barack Obama was the president. There was a lot of concern about it with Donald Trump, and the concern about kids in cages, till they found out those cages were built during the Obama administration. And now there's almost no one talking about this. Vice President Kamala Harris makes one trip to a relatively innocuous, safe place, and that is it. And so we have, under the Trump administration, building about 450 miles of wall during his presidency that most people give him credit for, although some of the skeptics don't even give him credit for that, because they say, well, some of those walls existed. Yeah, but they were almost insignificant. These were much more substantial. And of course, now the governor of the state of Texas, Greg Abbott, is taking the time to see if it's possible that if the federal government won't build the walls, we have some of these materials just sitting there resting and rotting. Why can't we take some money aside from, first of all, the Texas budget and from individual donors and build the wall? We'll see where that takes us, but that's why this is in the news this week. And to give you a sense of what this looks like, I wanted you to be able to watch a video. Now, Julio Rosas, I've mentioned before, is an individual that has been kind of a reporter for Town Hall. And if you followed him, he's gone to Minneapolis when we had some of the riots, and he's been down there at the border. And he was in La Jolla, Texas the other day, in which he at that time reported that the Border Patrol had about 75 illegal immigrants or undocumented workers, or whatever phrase you want to use. These were mostly families. A lot of them were unaccompanied minors. Also, think about this, as we're talking about those people getting off of those airplanes in Chicago and New York and Seattle and Dallas and Los Angeles. Imagine if a lot of those are just kids just walking off into the sunset there, and they're unaccompanied minors. Again, just think about that for a minute. And so anyway, he is in the midst of doing kind of one of the stand-up shots you do before. And so the lights are on. There's moths jumping around here because the lights are on. And in the distance, you can watch the video and you can see that there is a raft. And the thing that struck me so much was how nonchalant everybody was. Instead of going, oh, maybe we should wait till the camera lights go off and then cross the river. No, we'll just, matter of fact, be appreciative of the fact that since the lights are on, we can find our way to the shore much easier. There's a part of one individual trying to shield his eyes, but by and large, there was just, oh, great, welcome to America. And they walk on the shore, and there they go. Now, sometimes they're met by Border Patrol. Lots of times they're not, and they're now in the country. And if they are met by Border Patrol, they're processed very quickly, and then they're put on buses, and they're sent all over the country. And if you've actually looked at some of the videos that have been made of those buses, you see some people here that you're saying, I'm not sure that I want them in my community. Now, again, I'll be fair to say that just because a person looks like a criminal doesn't mean they're a criminal, but you kind of know the look of people that look pretty angry and they look kind of mean-spirited, and you've seen all these tats. Some of them look like maybe they might even be gang tats. Now, it's possible. It's theoretically possible that they become a Christian and they're going to be a upstanding member of the American society, but probably not all of them, and they're just put in a bus and they're sent off, and they show up in your community. And then now you have the responsibility to take care of them, because until they can find some kind of meaningful work, they are going to be dependent on whatever they can do to support themselves, and maybe get involved in all sorts of activities that as a homeowner you wouldn't really appreciate. Which brings me to the piece that I posted yesterday by Tyler O'Neill, in which he says he is convinced that there is going to be what he calls a Biden border backlash. So you have to go to yesterday's piece, in which, first of all, there have been some surveys that have been done, and the question was, how serious of an issue do you think illegal immigration is for the country right now? 43% very serious, 37% somewhat serious. Okay, that's kind of interesting. Here's another question. Do you think the number of monthly border crossings by illegal immigrants have increased, decreased, or stayed the same? Well, 63% say increased. 19% say stayed the same, which is wrong. Decreased 17%. I don't even know what world they live in, but again, it just shows how the mainstream press or the establishment press isn't even covering this particular story effectively. Then finally, do you think the Biden administration's executive orders on immigration are encourage or discourage illegal immigration? 68% encourage. I'll get into some more of those, but it, I think, illustrates that if indeed there was an election being held this November rather than next November, there are certainly going to be a lot of voters that are going to ask a lot more questions about immigration than they were during the last particular election cycle. And when we come back, I want to take some phone calls. What are your thoughts? Maybe you think that immigration is decreased. Love to hear from you. Or increased. Or you think it's a very serious problem. Maybe you don't think it's a problem. Love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212 is the on-air line. But as we go to a break, once again, I encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net, to find some of these articles. But most importantly, we have a banner that says, Be a Difference Maker. And we have a matching fund. We're trying to at least meet the match. And so if you'd like to help us, you can go to pointofview.net, or, of course, you can talk to someone off air, 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. We'll be back right after this.
Today is the day that with one simple act, you can make a difference in our country over the next 6 months. This is one of the biggest opportunities to double your impact that I can remember. We have a $65,000 matching challenge to end the fiscal year today. These friends will match your investment in the transforming work of Point of View dollar for dollar up to $65,000. But we need you to step up today. Our fiscal year-end total will help define how much we can accomplish together for the remainder of 2021, how much fake news we can combat together, how many experts we can bring you with wisdom on how to act. Together, our work will change people, churches, communities, and the nation. Make a difference by visiting pointofview.net/difference or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Make double the difference. Pointofview.net/difference and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Just a minute, I'm going to move on, but I just thought I would pick out one or two more pieces from this piece that actually it is a very good article, probably a better way to say that, by Tyler O'Neill about looking at some of the surveys that have been done. And let me hasten to add that when I point out that some of these comments that are made by the various Americans who were actually surveyed, and it looks like a pretty reputable survey in terms of numbers and percentages and the rest, I'm not criticizing them so much as I am saying this just illustrates that when the press does not cover a story, people don't really know much about it. And so these percentages tell me that even without a very serious amount of coverage of what I think most people would agree is a crisis at the border, you have 43% who think it is very serious, another 37% think it's somewhat serious. You add those numbers together and you get 80% who may actually see this as an issue to consider in the next election. Let me just give you two other points and we'll move on. One of the questions that was asked, do you think that people who cross the border with Mexico illegally should be turned back to Mexico or released into the U.S. with a court date? And 67%, or 2/3 of all the people surveyed, whether Republican or Democrat, independent, said they should be turned back to Mexico. Is that the policy that we have right now? Not very much. Maybe a few, not many. And so what I thought was most significant is they ask them in a survey, can you give us an estimate on how many people you think are crossing the border? Now, I'll give you the number. The number they used was 200,000. Now, we just heard Gary Bauer talk about May. It was 170,000. So if you look, matter of fact, I think this one was done the month before, so that would be April. And so 200,000's within the right order of magnitude. And so what they were just asking is, can you give us a number or a percentage or a range? Most of the people said either less than 10,000 per month, or then another group said 10,000 to 50,000. And if you take those two groups together, you have a majority, about 52%. 21% said less than 10,000, another 31% less than 50,000. And of course, that's not even the right order of magnitude. You have to go all the way down to fractions, of just single percentages. I think all of 7% estimated that somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 per month. And so obviously, even those that think this is a serious problem, when asked to maybe just get a guess, and that's all it is, a guess, and we're not criticizing the people that didn't know the number. How would you know the number if the press never tells you, right? And it's really hard to dig up. Then you can see that. So then they come back, interestingly enough, and say, okay, let us now tell you that we had 200,000 immigrants that were crossing the southern border each month, or about 2.4 million coming here illegally each year. Okay, now once they have that factor and they know a little bit more, now they ask the question, given these numbers, should the administration continue its current policies or at least institute and issue new, stricter policies to reduce the flow? And as you might imagine, 64%, so again, about 2/3 say we need stricter policies. So you can see that this is perhaps one more illustration is why I hope you'll support whether it's Point of View or some of these other ministries we've highlighted, because these particular stories are not being covered, and they're not being covered well. And then we're asking the American people to make decisions based upon inadequate information. And the sad reality is only a few individuals in this whole survey had even a vague idea of how many people were crossing the border. But even when they had an inaccurate view of the number crossing the border, overwhelming percentage of those people believed that something needed to be changed. And so that's something to think about as well. If you would like to join the conversation, we would love to get your comments. And so before I move on to the issue of Tucker Carlson and some of the things he's been alleging, let's, if we can, go back to the phones, and we'll go to Georgia on the Good News Network. Cheryl, I'd love to hear you tell our story.
Yes. My son is stationed in Beaufort right now in South Carolina, and his wife is originally from Panama. He has paid $6,000 to get her to be a U.S. citizen, certified, everything you got to do in America. We go to a Walmart there, and there's a big, huge bus, like a yellow school bus, but it's painted red, has yellow and green writing. And she looks and she says, look there, there's one of those buses. And I said, what are you talking about? She says, oh, it's a bus that brings all the immigrants. Or they have immigrants on them or whatever they have.
Sure.
So we go to another place there, and there's another bus somewhere else across town. And I'm thinking, this is so wrong. And she gets mad because she did hers the right way. And then you have this open border mess, and we're just livid. I'm just livid about it.
We should be. And I've had quite a number of individuals that came here from other countries, and they stood in line, if you will, and went through all the process. And now they're seeing people jump in line in front of them, especially the ones that are still waiting in wherever it might be. It could be in Singapore. It could be in Nigeria. It could be in Germany or Canada. It could be in South Africa. It could be in Japan, whatever it might be. And they're seeing that these individuals that just in a sense jump in front of the line might get their citizenship before those who have taken the time to do it honestly and legally. And so sometimes they're the ones that are most frustrated by what is happening right now with the open borders. But just imagine that this is an administration that does not want to deal with the borders and is pretty much reconstructing the, if you will, the demographics of, let's use the examples you just used, South Carolina, Georgia, or whether it's Tennessee or Kentucky or Colorado or California or whatever it might be, because they're bringing in people, dumping them off, and then the social services in those communities have to address those issues. And maybe they actually are hard workers and want to actually get some kind of citizenship in the future. But until any of that is done by Congress, which I don't see happening anytime soon, they're just going to have to live in the shadows because they're here illegally in the first place. So, Cheryl, you've illustrated one of the reasons why I think this issue of immigration is a big issue and should be a big issue in the next election.
I know that's right.
Well, I appreciate you.
I appreciate taking my call. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And just before we take a break, let me just real quickly, before we get into some other issues, mention that many of you wanted to know what to think about the claim by Tucker Carlson. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, he made the claim actually Monday, then reiterated it again on Tuesday, that the U.S. national security is actually, the NSA is actually investigating him, spying on his texts and emails, and then plans to leak them in an attempt to take him off his program on Fox News in the future. Now, how do we think about this? Well, here's a thought. Extraordinary accusations require extraordinary proof. And at the moment, Tucker Carlson, never met him, don't know him, but certainly have followed him and watched him, is saying that he gets this from an unnamed source who he says is a whistleblower. But again, this is a pretty strong accusation. Think about this personally. Imagine if somebody is telling you that, my next door neighbor, he just doesn't really like me. And you go, well, okay, what evidence you have for that? Well, whenever I go to the mailbox and he's outside, he goes back in, doesn't want to talk to me. Okay, so, well, that's probably true. If your friend instead says, I think my next door neighbor is stealing mail from my mailbox, You'd say, okay, what evidence do you have? Have you ever seen him go to your mailbox? No, but I'm missing mail, so I'm sure it's him. No, I need a little more proof than that. And so Tucker Carlson right now is saying that, look, the NSA is capturing this information for political reasons. And so the statement being issued by the National Security Agency is that said that Tucker Carlson has never been an intelligence target of the agency, and the NSA has never had plans to try to take his program off the air. Okay, but you actually didn't quite say we haven't been spying on him. And then they go on to talk about we target foreign powers to generate insights on foreign activities that could harm the United States. And, of course, Tucker Carlson was on last night just saying this was infuriatingly dishonest because in some respects what they did was it was kind of a non-denial denial. And so we'll see where this goes. But, again, burden of proof right now on you, Tucker Carlson. Glad you have an unnamed source. Maybe it is the case. Is the NSA doing that? I have some more doubts about that. Is there a possibility somebody in the NSA is doing that? Yeah, it's going to relate to what I'm going to talk about in just a minute. I think somebody in the IRS leaked the tax returns of some of the wealthiest people in America. But I don't think the IRS did all of that. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head first of all to South Carolina, WHBJ. And Anna, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi there. You were just talking about South Carolina and the undocumented individuals entering our state. I'm a teacher, and our population of children that are undocumented and unaccompanied has tripled.
Wow.
Since the borders were opened. And we had to hire another teacher. They call them ESOL teachers, English as a second other language. We had to hire another teacher to handle that population. And the sad thing is these are children that don't even know where they are and why they're here. And basically they've just been dropped off. We find out that I can't disclose too much because we do have to do home visits. And we find out they don't even have a permanent address. Some of them live in migrant camps. Some of them live with non-relatives. Some of them might live with an uncle, but then rarely are they with a parent or a birth relative. And this, I don't think President Biden considered this when he made this decision to open the borders, the trickle-down effect, and how this would adversely affect the children. And this is definitely adversely affecting the children. I see it every day.
Wow. You know, South Carolina is 1,200 miles. I just looked it up from Texas, and Texas border had a few more. So it's closer to almost 1,400 miles. So if you're dealing with that in South Carolina, this is something, of course, that people have had to deal with in South Texas for some time, or in California or Arizona. But you're in South Carolina, and you have had the number triple. So I so appreciate you calling in, and thank you for being a servant, being an educator. So thank you for calling in today.
You're welcome.
Wish I had time to chat with every one of you, but I do want to give a few more a chance to join the conversation. So let's head out to California. KPLM, Abigail, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. I just want my voice to be heard. I am floored. I can't even express my agitation, anger, and disgust at what's going on, and that our president allows it and doesn't seem to give a flip. It just doesn't make any sense to me. People elected that man to be the leader of this country. I won't make any comments about it, but I think it was a huge mistake. I think it was a manipulated election. And now, instead of militarily trying to get an effective course, take over America, now they're doing it from the inside out. They're doing it by this. This will break our country. This will break our country.
You live in California, so you've already seen it. I mean, let's just be honest. We've had Victor Davis Hanson on and others talk about that. Yes.
Yeah, but now it's going to explode. I mean, on the bus system, the public transit system, the school system. I'm livid about it. I want my hand. I don't know what else to do but give money to Point of View. And, I'm getting on the school board. Within the next 2 months, I'm going to get on the school board. And that's my little part of it.
You got two things right there, because first of all, we appreciate your financial support, but we also want to equip you so that you can make a difference. And so that's a lot of resources on our website so that if you do run for school board, and especially if you're elected, you know about these issues. And second of all, I think more and more people need to recognize, I still think one of the most important elections in the country is the election to your school board. And
oh my goodness!
Yes,
you're so right. You're so right. And without my listening to Point of View, which I do daily, I wouldn't even have known. It would have all slid by me. I don't watch TV, so I don't get involved in all the national baloney that's posted on the news stuff, which is a bunch of.
Yeah, thank you for calling it baloney, because I was afraid what we're going to call it next. But anyway, I'm just about out of time, so I did want to mention just real quickly before we kind of do our close, is one of the other articles you might find on the website. You're going, what about this idea of tax exemption of churches? And it goes back to what we talked about on Friday. I also have a commentary coming out next week, so you can actually see that as well, because the group Christians Engaged was prevented from getting their tax exempt status. And this is very similar to what we saw 8 years ago when some of the Tea Party groups did not get this. And the argument is that Christians Engaged, because they teach the Bible and actually have biblical teaching, that's kind of affiliated with the Republican Party, so that makes them political, and so they should not get a tax-exempt status, a 501c3 organization. The piece that I've posted here follows up on the fact that just the other day, You had Representative Jared Huffman, who is a representative from California, who has suggested that it's time for the Catholic Church to be stripped of its tax-exempt status because the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops voted to draft a document that would rebuke pro-abortion Catholic politicians. And so that becomes political. And so I just wanted you to know that there seems to be a drumbeat. Is it going to happen anytime soon? I doubt it. But, you know, I'm never surprised by the speed sometimes of the way in which some things do happen, that once you have the head of the IRS director of exempt organizations arguing that one particular organization is ineligible for tax-exempt status because it actually has biblical teachings, and that is tantamount to political campaign intervention, you can see that if you use that argument with a heavy hand, it could be justified maybe removing the tax-exempt status of lots of Christian nonprofits and even churches. Will that happen tomorrow? No. If we aren't diligent, could it happen in the future? Yes, that's why we posted that article. And some of you might see that article and say, well, where'd that come from? Well, it came from the fact that all of a sudden now the IRS is doing what it was doing 8 years ago. 8 years ago, you might remember that if you were one of these Tea Party groups, you didn't get a 501c3. You didn't even get a 501c4. The IRS said, no, we're going to just exclude anybody that has words like tax, Tea Party, patriot, those kinds of things. Now we have one, at least, organization, which we've talked about, that actually was denied that because their biblical teachings seem a little too affiliated with the Republican Party. By the way, this cuts both ways, because if it indeed some of the teachings of, I don't know, Planned Parenthood, various pro-abortion groups, various kind of activist groups, the ACLU correlate with the Democratic Party, if you're going to be fair, maybe we ought to pull those tax-exempt status as well. And before it's all through, the ones that would survive are the Christians, because I think Christians would still support Christian organizations, still support their church. It's the people that go to liberal churches or the people that support things like the ACLU that are doing it in part to get a tax-exempt benefit might not. So we'll see where that goes. We're just about out of time. We're down to about 9 hours before our fiscal year ends, even though we're going off the air. If you would want to give us a call, that number is 800-347-5151. If you get a busy signal or somebody doesn't pick up, just give it a minute, because maybe we will overwhelm a few people with the phone call. But again, 800-347-5151. Of course, we have a matching fund. I don't think we've met it yet. And if you want to put us over the top, you can be one of those people to do so. Of course, you can at any time, 24/7, go to the website pointofview.net. We have a banner there. It says Give Now, and we have a matching fund, and we certainly appreciate those of you that have supported this ministry. If it has been a difficult financial year for you and you cannot give, we certainly understand. Just tell us how we can pray for you. But those of you that can step forward, we would greatly appreciate it. Well, tomorrow is July 1st, and we've got some really good things to talk about on Thursday, and then Friday, of course, our weekend edition. So we are looking forward to a very, very good week, and encourage you to find some of the articles we've posted today on the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Point of View.
Today is the day that with one simple act, you can make a difference in our country over the next 6 months. This is one of the biggest opportunities to double your impact that I can remember. We have a $65,000 matching challenge to end the fiscal year today. These friends will match your investment in the transforming work of Point of View, dollar for dollar, up to $65,000. But we need you to step up today. Our fiscal year-end total will help define how much we can accomplish together for the remainder of 2021, how much fake news we can combat together, how many experts we can bring you with wisdom on how to act. Together, our work will change people, churches, communities, and the nation. Make a difference by visiting pointofview.net/difference or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Make double the difference. Pointofview.net/difference and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.